I became engrossed in this subject matter, and I don't know why. It started off with a couple of pictures of the explosion itself, or the fire cloud, the explosion. And I felt, I don't know, I felt they were in the wrong place. The knowledge, the locations, they were wrong in my mind. And myself and another fellow, Pierre Richard, we spent about a year and a half trying to figure out where everything was, and we did that. I put it up on a website, and I had a whole bunch of people say, oh, no, that's not right. But then I had a whole bunch of people who said it was. So a lot of that stuff is about trying to do the research. It's an event that's been underestimated, underplayed. It's a very important national event that's just never become what it should have been, and maybe still can be, but as we go on, it doesn't seem like it will be, but there are people that care about that stuff, and maybe one of these days somebody will listen. When I said that, at the beginning I said, you know, the Halifax Explosion is underrated, but that goes for the Empress of Ireland disaster as well, because these two were eclipsed by the war, of course, and they did not have the affectations of wealth and celebrity and all that garbage that came along with the Titanic. The Titanic, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, the Titanic fervor that we have in Halifax is far misplaced. We need to concentrate more on our own homegrown disaster, which was the Halifax Explosion, and that should be a priority with everyone who was associated with it. Well, everybody who, all of the people who write about it care about it, but the city should care a little bit more about it, a lot more about it. The main reason I started off writing this book was to vindicate in some way Commander F. Evan Wyatt. It was Gary Shutlak that pointed out to me that his name wasn't Frederick. It's custom to use the second name as the first name. And that turned out to be true, as true can be. I found his name, he signed his name Evan Wyatt. All of his official documentation was signed Evan. And that was his name. I'm sure that's what all his friends called him. At least the friends he had before they turned his world upside down in Halifax. He was a very interesting fellow. I never did find a picture of Evan Wyatt, except the ones that were in the paper, which I composited to get, you know, from the morning edition, the evening edition. Rita Boswell, who was the archivist at Westminster School in England, she sent me a picture of Evan Wyatt when he was 15 years old, and that's the only actual photograph I have of them. She sent me the class of 1893. Gary found out that he was a student there, and he was from 1890 to 1894. These people that I wrote about, they were three-dimensional human beings. They were not one-dimensional cardboard characters. My goal was to find pictures of these people. I started off with 150 names, and even after all these years, I still only ended up with about 85 pictures, mainly because it seems that, you know, people in Canada don't seem to care about their history on a general level. Now, I know that's not true. There are many people that do, but generally it seems that the pictures are hard to find, and especially unless you're an admiral or high up in government. Even Captain DeMare, who was the rec commissioner held a position for years and years and decades, I could only find one picture, and that was in his obituary in the Ottawa Citizen in 1938. I'm going to show you this first picture, which is a view of the Bedford Basin as we know it today. When you're coming out of that basin, as Francis Mackey said in his 1958 interview, it looks quite wide coming out there. You know, John Johansson, who was the helmsman of the Emo, that could have been a factor, but of course he would have seen that coming in, so I don't see it as a great excuse. I'm sure you're all familiar with this picture, the Govan and Gensel picture from 1898 showing all the piers. It's interesting because what I want you to take a note of is the little bit of Shannon Park, what is Shannon Park today, that little bit of land jutting out at the end there. You want to take a good notice of that because that angle is very important. Now, the very interesting thing about this photograph is right here. That little building is where Vince Coleman probably would have sent his message from. And that's very interesting because that picture was about 20 years before it happened, but I think that was pretty much the same building. Janet Kitts was kind enough to lend me her Emo versus Mont Blanc appeal book, and this picture is one of the Admiralty charts. Now, when these men were in the courtroom, they would have these charts on the table, and they'd have little boats, little wooden boats to show where things were going on. This particular XP there, that is where Emo would have been moored, and made its way out along there down towards the little cove there, and then Mont Blanc was at the examination, left the examination at around 7:30, and would have been coming up on the Dartmouth side. Mont Blanc was coming up, doing the right thing, coming up on the right side. The idea was for Emo to come down on the western side, along where Pier 9 is there. The holes in the front of wet and dry picric acid completely in there with dynamite up in that little corner there. And then the back of it has the same wet and dry picric acid with dynamite and like TNT throughout the whole thing. And plus it had the 494 barrels of benzol on the top. I'd just like to read you one little thing from Amy Lemedic's testimony, where he said, every precaution was taken. In each hold, they had constructed special storage for the cargo, wooden magazines, no iron appliances. The boards were nailed with copper nails so as not to provide any sparks. The laborers had their feet provided with linen cloths. Each kind of explosive was separated from the next by wooden partitions. Even the bars close to the holds were recovered with wood. The holds were covered with wooden board panels opened on each side. They had appliances on the corners over the tarred cloth so that no contact could be made with the hold. These were tightly screwed on, hermetically closed. It was absolutely forbidden to smoke on board. It was forbidden to go on deck with matches. So this boat was not loaded badly, but this boat was a lousy boat to have that kind of a cargo. We all know that. It was too damn slow, and it had been through. It wasn't taken care of over the years. It was used as an ore boat for Anquetil, who was in Rouen, who was basically interested in profit and not interested in the upkeep of the boat. So it basically was a big old clunker that we got up here. That line is where the line of sight of the first sighting of Emo by the Mont Blanc. And that's really the most important thing, other than the fact that number H, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's a little bit below Pier 6, which is on the left. Now, when Amy Lemedic, the captain of Mont Blanc, was testifying, that's not where he said the collision occurred, but that's where it's written on that particular chart. On his chart, the H is written slightly above Pier 6, which makes more sense to me. And that's where he said it was, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, he said it, and that's what it is. There was a preliminary hearing later on. Peter Bajonas, who was the second officer on EMO, said that when he heard 2 blasts, he said it sounded to me like they didn't know what they were doing. And that may be possible, because I don't believe that there's a lot of confusion about whether or not the pilot was in control of the boat or the captain was in control of the boat because of its erratic behavior. What people don't understand or don't know about the EMO is that it required a wide turn to turn. It couldn't turn on a dime. It wasn't as maneuverable as Mont Blanc. When it came down, it met a boat coming up the western side. As you can see, it's fairly close to Pier 9 up there on the left. Pilot Renner, Edward Renner, was piloting a boat called SS Clara. The boat came up on the wrong side of the harbor. It was the first boat in that morning before Mont Blanc. So it was coming up the harbor and it was on the wrong side. Now, Renner knew pilot Hayes, William Hayes, who was the pilot, young pilot, I think he was 24, I'm not sure. Young pilot who was piloting EMO. They communicated by megaphone. Well, we're gonna pass each other starboard to starboard. It's easier. It's easier to do that. And they did. Now, when the EMO was coming in at a fair clip, started off around 7 knots. I hear sometimes, in some cases, it may have gone to 11, but not sure. But I can tell you that when it was forced to turn, the engineer's SCAR got half speed, stop, and reverse. As soon as they got in towards the harbor, EMO was already in reverse, but their engines were stopped. They were going ahead on forward momentum. After they passed Clara, Captain Horatio Brannan, who was the skipper of the Stella Maris, was coming out from the dockyard there and was going up the middle of the channel with a load of ash on 2 barges. Well, they decided that rather than run into the barges, they would decide to avoid them as well. Combined, the 2 ships sent the EMO too far over onto the Dartmouth side. My theory is that, well, by the time they headed over there, they were going pretty slow. Now, a boat like that in ballast, it had no cargo, there was nothing inside it. It was headed down to New York to get a cargo of grain. That boat was uncontrollable at that speed, at 4 knots. You can control a boat like that at 7 knots, but you can't control a boat like that at 4 knots. And I don't know how slow the boat was, but it was certainly getting slower and slower as it was going down the harbor. And combined with that wide turn and the tide. And I use the example of HMS Preserver, which just happened last year, November 4th, in 2011. That boat was, what, 100 times more powerful than the EMO. Bigger, more powerful. Now, granted, there was 10 more knots of wind that they had to deal with, but when you take into consideration the size of the boat, the power of the boat, well, you know what happened. They were in full reverse and couldn't manage not causing $500,000 worth of damage at $100,000 worth of damage as they smashed into the pier at the Irving Pier. So I believe that EMO was out of control. And I believe that the blasts that they were sending out were not, I'm taking over this side of the channel or get it, you know. To me, it was like, get the hell out of my way, I'm out of control, I can't do anything. And I bet you those guys were just scrambling trying to get back with that wide arc that they needed to turn their boat. There was no way. It was an accident waiting to happen, and that's exactly what did happen.